Okay, welcome everybody to the Grand Rapids City Planning Commission meeting on January 23rd, 2025. We are going to start our public hearing soon, but I'll just give a recap of the procedures here. First, staff will present each case, and then the applicant will have an opportunity to come up and add anything they'd like to, and then we'll have the public hearing. During the public hearing, any member of the public may speak. You'll have 3 minutes, and we ask that you, when you come up to the mic, you say your name for the record, and then direct your comments to the commission and not to the audience. The applicant will then have an opportunity to respond to any comments that are made, and then Planning Commission will deliberate and make a decision. So with that, our first case is 2411 Burton Street Southeast, and I believe Avery is going to walk us through this. I'm sorry, we have to do conflict of interest first. Does anybody have a conflict of interest today?
Yeah. No.
Okay, thank you.
The first item on the agenda is a request for the sale of wine and beer for off-site consumption in association with an existing gas station and new convenience store at 2411 Burton Street Southeast. The sale of alcohol requires special land use approval. On January 11th, 2024, the Planning Commission approved a request to sell wine and beer for off-site consumption in association with the existing convenience store and vehicle fueling station at this location. Subsequent to approval, alcohol sales were implemented. The existing 912 square foot convenience store is proposed for demolition and reconstruction with a new 2,300 square foot expanded store. A land use development or LUDS permit has been approved and the building permit is under review. The application under review by the Planning Commission today consists of alcohol sales for the new convenience store and consideration of building transparency reductions. All other site and building elements either have been or will be addressed administratively. Some key considerations of the request before you today are neighborhood concerns, whether the proposed use adequately addresses the special land use standards for neighborhood effects, whether the alcohol use adequately addresses the alcohol review standards, such as given the character, location, development trends, and other aspects of the neighborhood in which the use is requested. It is demonstrated that the neighborhood is underserved by the use and that the addition of the use will be a demonstratable asset to the neighborhood. The use or change in use as constructed and operated by the applicant is compatible with the neighborhood. Adjacent or nearby parks, playgrounds, religious institutions, or schools will not be adversely affected. That the applicant has considered and has procedures prepared so that the use will be constructed and operated by the applicant in a manner that has the potential to minimize or eliminate negative secondary effects on the neighborhood, such as vehicular and pedestrian traffic, excess numbers of persons gathering outside the establishment, peak hours of use that materially adds to congestion or other negative traffic-related effects in the neighborhood, fighting, brawling, or other behaviors that accompany intoxication, robberies, shoplifting, and other crimes that have a tendency to affect party stores, convenience stores, and other retail establishments open late. The 2024 Community Master Plan Future Character and Land Use Map designates this property as a community activity center. Chapter 5, which is the Desirable Development Character chapter, recommends that community activity centers provide places to live, work, and shop around key intersections and along corridors to evolve areas into well-connected, walkable places within a 15-minute walk, bike, or transit trip for surrounding neighborhoods. And this property is not included in any area-specific plan. The surrounding zoning and land uses near this site include To the north, east, and south, MCNC with Sheldon's Cleaner, the drive approach for the auto car wash to the east, a Rite Aid to the south, which is now closed, and then the west is the NOS Zone District with a First Merchants Bank. The existing site is approximately just under 19,000 square feet in area, and the subject property is located at the northeast corner of Breton Road and Burton Street. The existing car wash and dry cleaner property to the north of the subject site, as shown here and here in the different yellow shadings. So this one is 1970, this one is 1974 Breton Road Southeast, are to be combined, and all improvements will be demolished to construct a new car wash. And on the subject site here in the yellow shading will be a new just under or just over 2,300 square foot convenience store with vehicle fueling and alcohol sales being proposed. And the fuel canopy will remain. The combined northern lot and subject property will have an integrated design so that traffic can flow between the two sites. Between the two sites, there will be 10 parking spaces provided, and a new landscape buffer between the subject property and proposed car wash site to the north will be installed. 3 curb cuts will be in the same general locations as the current curb cuts shown here, here, and here. The store will include a retail area for typical convenience store items as well. For the proposed building, the transparency is measured between 2 feet and 8 feet. This site is located on a corner lot, and therefore it has 2 front yards and 2 side yards. And the front-facing elevation of the building faces Breton and Burton and require 40% transparency, while the side building elevations require 20% in the MCNC zone district. The 2 front-facing elevations meet the 40% transparency requirement, whereas the north and east side elevations do not meet the 20% transparency requirement. Here's an image of the north elevation as it exists today, and there's no proposed transparency, as well as the east elevation as it is today. The Planning Commission may grant a departure where it is demonstrated by the applicant that transparency would be significantly detrimental to the operation or security of the proposed use, or any side of a building abuts an outdoor service area such as loading spaces, trash removal operations, ground level mechanical facilities, or similar uses. And the Planning Commission should consider whether transparency waivers are warranted on the north and east sides of the building. For the overall facility operation and the use consideration before you today, the convenience store will be open from 6 a.m. to 11 p.m., 7 days a week. Section 5.9.05G of the zoning ordinance requires a cash register viewing window of at least 20 square feet in which the proposal meets that requirement. Up to 5 employees may work at any one time. The applicant has submitted standard operating procedures for alcohol sales. The alcohol will be stocked on 3 warm display shelves shown here, as well as 5 cooler shelves here and a walk-in cooler here. The Planning Commission may consider further exploration with the applicant regarding the walk-in cooler and the alcoholic beverages which will fit in this space. There are several establishments within 1,000 feet of the subject location that sell alcohol for off-site consumption, which are listed in the packet and shown here. There are certain SEPTED requirements for the site for the alcohol use, and SEPTED is crime prevention through environmental design, and it is a philosophy of crime prevention that utilizes a multidisciplinary approach for the built environment that is intended to deter criminal behavior, foster improved quality of life, assist in achieving community policing goals, and facilitate self-policing by the community. SEPTEB draws on passive strategies incorporated into the normal planning, design, and management of a built environment. The ordinance applies to establishments that sell tobacco, alcohol, and marijuana, massage businesses, and other establishments open later than midnight. Elements of the ordinance addresses visibility, such as window transparency, cash register viewing location, as I discussed previously, and other property maintenance. The floor plan provided shows the proposed locations for video cameras in the packet, and the city's SEPTED specialists in planning and the police department have found the application and plan to be satisfactory. As far as neighborhood input, previously, when the case went before the Planning Commission last January, January 11th, 2024, the applicant invited neighboring property owners from Ridgemore and Eastgate neighborhood associations to an open house style meeting offered on 2 separate dates, in which no visitors attended either of the 2 meetings, and the applicant has not conducted any further outreach relative to the current request before you today. Several letters of opposition have been received, and all of which express concerns about the impact that alcohol sales may have on the nearby neighborhoods. In summary, the Planning Commission should consider the applicant's request to sell wine and beer for off-site consumption in association with an existing gas station and new convenience store at 2411 Burton Street Southeast. Does the Planning Commission have any questions for me before I turn over to the applicant?
Thanks, Avery. Does anyone have any questions?
I have 2. One, did we act on this last year? I thought we did.
Yep.
Yes.
And this is different how?
Yep. So
from
this
last year?
This is different because the applicant has decided to reconstruct this convenience store.
Okay.
And enlarge the convenience store up about almost 2,000 square feet. And as such, they are also seeking to increase the floor area dedicated to alcohol sales that exceed what was previously approved.
Okay.
And so therefore, it's back before the Planning Commission.
The other question I have, this was, I'm kind of glad to see that there's just 2 operations here because it was kind of confusing when it was 3 entrances with Sheldon Cleaners there. And I wonder if we still need 3 access points, because that's a busy intersection and cars coming and going. I wondered if we still needed. It looks to me as if there's 2 access points for the convenience store / gas station.
So I don't see our colleagues in Mobile GR transportation planners, but the land use development, the site plan approvals for these properties generally has already been reviewed and vetted by their transportation engineers.
Okay.
So I can't speak to all the reasons why they found that to be appropriate or necessary, but based on the turning movements necessary for both the gas station and the car wash, these curb cuts were determined to be appropriate based on and indicative by the permit being issued.
Okay. Thank you. That's it.
All right. Any other questions? I have just one. So I'm wondering if we know if since they were approved to sell beer and wine last year, if there have been an influx of incidents or police calls related to that.
Yep, so I was able to consult with our police department, and there is only 1 call in 2024, so.
Thank you. Okay, we can have the applicant come.
I have one more
Oh,
question.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, so am I understanding correctly that this was sort of reviewed as an entire site? So like the parking is somewhat shared as
Yes.
well, right? So the applicant's request to have what I think is the east side as with no transparency is somewhat related to those 4 parking spaces that are there. Are those, where are those, who's going to park there? Like how did those come to be?
Yeah, so it was more so designed as an overall integrated design with the proposed car wash and the convenience store, with the vacuums over here and the parking spaces in front here. So they just found that this would be a sufficient spot for the parking here to accommodate for both uses.
And if I remember correctly, those were thought to be dedicated for employees of the car wash, I think was some of the initial concepts. And to Avery's point, both property owners working, or both business operators working together to try to have maybe a more integrated site design that accommodates both uses. So those spaces, like you've mentioned on the east, my memory is that they were thought not reserved for, but that they would primarily be used by employees.
Okay, thanks.
Anybody else? All right, we'll have the applicant come up and add anything you'd like.
Good afternoon. Jonathan Durrell Law, working as the attorney for Eli's Mobile, and I'm here with Mr. Brad Potter from Newco, who has worked substantially on the design. I've spoken with Mr. Abdu, and he was having trouble traversing the weather conditions outside. You may pop in halfway through our comment here. I think I'd like to first appreciate Ms. Avery's presentation. She did a great job kind of hitting the highlights here. Again, this is redevelopment of an existing store and existing use in substantially the same overall design, just a larger scale. We were able to accomplish that larger scale by, among other things, removing the existing dry cleaning building. As of this morning, I drove past there, and it's gone, and so was the car wash. And that car wash, I think the redevelopment with a Tommy's is going to be a really great addition to that corner, and that the design of the new building is going to be very accretive to those two properties working together. We were here about a year ago. I don't remember who asked the question, but we were here. We didn't have much objection from the community at that time. The police department seems to have indicated that there hasn't been any significant increase either at the location or within the community. A couple of other quick highlights. There was a question on the parking. I believe, Mr. Yonker, that was your question. There is a parking easement in play, and that's going to be shared, but primarily used by the incoming auto wash. The transparency question, I think, is probably the harder one in my mind for review, or the one that probably is going to get some more questions. The criteria are that it's demonstrated that it would be detrimental to the operations or safety, or that the areas with lower transparency are adjacent to things like service and trash. The existing structure has both the north and east sides have no transparency. The east side of the proposed building, from north to south, the entire east side has a combination of cold storage, a walk-in cooler, and dry storage for the entire width. Transparency doesn't look into the operational area of the business in any way if it were to be required to be added there. That is directly adjacent to where that parking easement is. So I think that hits kind of both of the criteria there. On the north side, the dry storage is in that northeast corner, so about half of the north side is going to be would be into that dry storage area. The other half of the north side of the building has a service exit only, which is, I believe, a steel door construction proposed, and also a business office, or what you might call a cash office. I think having windows or transparency into the cash office from the outside might actually be a real safety problem for anybody who might be looking on to determine what a right time for a problematic visit might be. There is, lastly, to revisit the walk-in cooler. It is a proposed walk-in cooler, but not, I think, to distinguish, this is not intended to be a beer cave. It has 5 out of approximately 10 doors are going to be dedicated for alcoholic beverages, but it's not advertised as a beer cave. It's just as a walk-in cooler for stocking from the rear. Allows for additional on-site storage, which right now they've had to store some of their goods off-site because of the lack of space in 910 square feet. So we're just really excited about the project. Brad, do you have any additions at this point? Otherwise, we'd be happy to answer any questions.
I think you've covered it.
Thank you.
Awesome, thank you. I do have a couple to start. So I just want to confirm again, so with the cooler, the only doors are the 5 that are listed there that are going to have alcohol?
There is a door to walk in, so.
Right, but only those shelves that are marked with beer.
Correct,
The rest
yeah.
of the storage in there is for cold storage of other
Be
things.
cold storage, it might be storage, but not display of alcohol beverages. But as far as display of for sale, alcohol beverages will be to those 5, and the remainder will be to other cold products.
And then I think I read in your application that the proportion of alcohol is similar to what is there now in terms of like the expansion of,
Yeah, we're not
Store.
looking to, pardon me for stepping on you there. We're not looking to increase volume disproportionate to the increase in the size of the building, if that answers the question.
what percentage of your sales now are alcohol?
You're talking about financially speaking, or the
Ye-
size of the cooler?
Yes, yeah,
I think we have
financially.
3 doors in that gas station right now? 2. We have 2 doors currently. So we're going from about 900 feet to about 2,300 feet, about 2.5 times the size. We're going from 2 to 5, about 2.5 times the size.
And financially, what percentage of sales is that?
Well, we just got the beer and wine, so we still don't have an actual.
You could step
Yeah,
up
you
and,
wanna come up
yeah.
here? And again, I mentioned that Mr. Abdu was having a little bit of trouble navigating the,
I'm glad you made it.
Took about
we are
since
too.
1 o'clock parking.
so, do you know,
We just received the license to sell beer and wine about, I think last year, about February.
Yep.
About a year ago. And so we haven't, by the time we got it in and all that, so we haven't reached what we need. What we haven't gotten to a point where we can have anything of significant.
So it's it's ancillary, it's
Yeah,
small.
it's still starting right now.
Okay,
and we don't have sufficient data, it sounds like,
Yeah.
because we don't have even a complete trailing 12 months.
got it. Thank you so much.
Of course.
Yep.
And then related to the transparency, I'm trying to see if I heard you correctly. Did you say transparency could be added to the east side?
I don't think it could be reasonably added to the east side. That's the request, would be that it be added to the east and the north sides. As it exists, the entire east wall
The walk-in cooler.
is going to be the walk-in cooler, and then on the northeast part of that wall.
Oh, I'm sorry,
will be
yes.
The dry storage.
So, but in the back room there, thanks for pulling up so I assume all the cash stuff will happen in that office, which has an additional wall and door. So will this back room be like for employee break time? Like, it seems like there could reasonably be some windows on that corner at least.
No, that's going to be where the bottle returns and other back stock that would be stocked against the wall back and against, on this side here. What, you want to mark it?
Yeah, there's, I think, some proposed shelving for
Okay.
basically warehousing of goods to be sold
Dry goods.
Okay.
of any type, right? And then there is, it looks like maybe a set tub there. But I think we only ever work with a single employee at this station, almost always.
Single, yeah.
Yeah, so
Mostly.
not much of a break room needed
Okay,
or useful at that location at all.
okay. Thanks. Anybody else have questions?
Can you speak to the choice to not conduct any public engagement as part of this application?
As Avery mentioned, we did a public outreach just about a year ago, had zero engagement directly with it. In communication with staff, and we felt, well, it's considered a brand-new application. It really is a request for the application to apply to the new construction. Except for the time that we're down for construction, we'll not cease selling alcoholic beverages at any time, since we were granted this special land use a year ago. And so we elected not to do it at this point.
Kristen, do you have?
I was just hoping you could clarify whether the walk-in cooler was accessible to the public, or is that just storage for employees only?
It's intended to be storage for the employees only.
see.
We had talked about with one of the members of staff, and I don't remember if it was Ms. Zeller or Ms. Wahamaki, but about whether a beer cave might be permitted. In talking with Mr. Abdu about it, after that conversation, we decided that doing that didn't make any sense for a number of reasons, among others, that we don't have transparency on that window.
Yeah, we don't want people walking in and out.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I will open up the public hearing. If you're here on this case and would like to speak, please step up to the microphone. Seeing none, I will close the public hearing. Commissioners?
I am pleased to see that the two property owners side by side have come together to, I think, design a much more useful and appearance-wise style here of buildings, because it's, as I was noting earlier, people sort of in and out between three very closely tight-knit buildings there. So I'm pleased to see the landscaping and the building, and it also looks like there'll be a way to access the auto wash from Breton, whereas before it was always from Burton. That I might be wrong, but that's what it looks like. But I am pleased by that. I wish there were more, particularly along the south wall, transparency, but I realize the operations might not be conducive to that.
So I'm generally in support of it, as is. Transparency is great, but I think we run into this with service stations all the time. In order for a service station to operate, they need some solid walls on the exterior of the building. It happens every single time we look at one of these, and we have the same discussion. I don't think anything significant has changed since the last time we had a discussion about alcohol sales on this site, so that doesn't bother me. So I showed up today feeling like this is no big deal. I am quite disappointed in the fact that with this level of investment, there was no attempt to connect with the community again. Whether you wanted to say it or not, it speaks to your priorities, and it doesn't send a message that I'm particularly fond of. But I don't think that changes my support for the project, I guess.
I noticed in the resolutions that we addressed the parapet. Did we address that in the first time over, or do we need to take a look at that today again?
So this is a different building elevation than what you would have seen in the first. And so it's typical for us when a case does need to go back before the Planning Commission or go before the Planning Commission, any admin departures or waivers, we effectively bring forward to the Planning Commission and include it as part of your consideration so that staff isn't approving some and that might then make the Planning Commission rethink the use, so we tend to bundle it together. So it is a different element from your previous consideration in last year.
But it was addressed at the staff level in terms of like making sure it was compliant or.
Yeah, sorry.
The LUDS permit was approved for this. We have received building permit plans. The building permit plans have been in flux. There's been, different plans submitted to us in building, and we just wanted to clarify it for everyone that the parapet wall shall be no higher than 4 feet.
Thank you.
May I quickly respond to that as well? Thank you. Just as a quick response, we are aware of that there's a height restriction. We've submitted actually new drawings with a couple of inches taken off the top there so that it is compliant as proposed with no need for a departure or a waiver. Thank you.
Yeah.
I too am in support of the project, but just for my own edification as a new commissioner, if we were not to approve, what would happen for the applicant? Would they no longer be able to sell alcohol or just not be allowed to have the expansion of alcohol sales?
They would be held to the limits of the previous approval, which I believe was 2 cooler doors and 3 square feet of shelving. Again, that was with a significantly smaller building, 900 square foot footprint, but I would argue that you've already provided land use rights to sell alcohol at this location. They would be limited to those previous conditions.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Yeah, I too am in support. We did receive a few letters from the community, but none of them indicate that alcohol sales that are ongoing have been an issue. And we heard about no additional calls related to alcohol here as well. So with it being a relatively ancillary to their sales, I'm not concerned about it either. And two, I'm excited about the site plan changes with additional parking lot screening and all of that. Does anyone want to make a motion? Do we cover everything we need to cover?
I didn't hear consensus on the transparency.
Oh, yes, thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
I think I heard from most of you. What I did hear was the Planning Commission is generally comfortable with the waiver. So if somebody doesn't support that, I think it would be helpful to put that on record.
I think the only thing, I am comfortable with the waiver, given how the building lays out. I think it's challenging to put transparency on four sides of a building like this. I think the one thing that I'm not being asked to comment on is, the wide expanses of hardy board in white would not be my preference. I think it will delaminate and will get dirty and will not look good for very long, but I don't think we're, that's the question before us. I'd love to see some spandrel glass or something to break up that back facade, particularly the east elevation. But overall, so other than the building materials, which would not be my preference, I'm comfortable with generally a lack of transparency.
If you found it necessary to do a mitigation measure, you've done that before, whether that's through the use of changing up the building elevation materials or the addition of art or landscaping, may not be appropriate in this case, but you do, if you're going to grant a waiver, you do have the ability to say it should be mitigated through a change or variation in building materials. The use of the hardy board and the color choice is not within your scope of authority.
I don't know if anybody else is, I just look at that east and north wall being a fairly, large, just blank flat wall of white. I feel like that's somewhat less than ideal. I think there is landscaping going in, particularly on the north, which breaks that up well enough for me. And frankly, the landscaping along Burton that's being added near the vacuums, et cetera, be near that entrance, probably does enough. The reality is it's the back of a building, and it just because of the way a site lays out, it's not ideal. But I guess I would support if there were others that were concerned to see an addition there, but I don't think it's necessary for me.
How do others feel about that? I was concerned about the transparency at first as well, especially when I was looking at the site plan, and it seemed like there could be opportunities, but after hearing testimony from the applicant about how those spaces will be used, I'm comfortable with the transparency as it is, or as proposed. Go ahead.
I can make a motion.
Just note that within the resolution, there was, towards the end in the condition, there's a statement about a walk-in cooler that you could strike if you were inclined to approve with those conditions. At the time of the writing of the report, we weren't clear that the walk-in cooler was not publicly accessible. Now that we know it's for staff only, it's not a necessary statement within the condition.
Item 2 there.
Item 2, yes, you could just strike that.
Okay.
Oh, I think just strike the walk-in cooler part. I still want to say what the limitation is.
Just the walk-in cooler portion.
Just the words.
Okay. Thank you. Now therefore be it resolved that the Planning Commission approves the special land use and site plan review request of Eli's Breton Village, Eli Abdu, for approval to sell beer and wine for off-site consumption in association with an existing gas station and new convenience store at 2411 Burton Street Southeast for the following reasons. The proposed use will be consistent with the purpose and intent of the master plan and zoning ordinance, including the zone district, because the development will maintain and enhance economically vibrant as well as attractive business and commercial areas, and the development will support compact centers that provide a mix of uses. 2024 Community Master Plan Vital Business Districts Recommendations 2A. The proposed use will meet site plan review standards of Section 51208E because the requested transparency reductions for the north and east side elevations will not place an excessive burden on public services given the compliance of the building with SEPTED requirements. The proposed installation of security cameras and incorporation of windows providing visibility of the cash register from the street. The proposed use will be compatible, harmonious, and appropriate with the character and uses of the neighborhood, adjacent properties, and natural environment because the convenience store and vehicle fueling station are already established at this location, and the expansion of package alcohol and new convenience store is not expected to impact the existing use, and it will remain a commercial use in a commercial zone district. The proposed use will not be detrimental, hazardous, or disturbing to existing or future uses or to the public welfare by reasons of excessive traffic, noise, smoke, odors, glare, and visual clutter because the convenience store and alcohol sales are expected to be an amenity for existing customers and an increase in traffic is not anticipated. The proposed use will not adversely affect the walkability of the neighborhood, impair pedestrian circulation patterns, disrupt the continuity of the urban street wall, or otherwise hinder the creation of a pedestrian-oriented environment because adequate transparency will be provided on the street-facing sides of the building, and the auto-related nature of the vehicle fueling station already exists and is not proposed to change. The proposed use will safeguard the health, safety, and general welfare of the public because adequate public services exist to serve the expanded use. The proposed use will not be detrimental to the financial stability or economic welfare of the city because the use is not anticipated to result in nuisance that require code enforcement actions, and the proposed development will enhance the viability of the business district in which it is located. Given the character, location, development trends, and other aspects of the neighborhood, it is demonstrated that the area is underserved by the proposed use and that the proposed location for alcohol sales will demonstrably be an asset to the neighborhood because the use is expected to be an amenity for customers already patronizing the vehicle fueling station. The use or change in use as constructed and operated by the applicant is compatible with the neighborhood because approval was granted for packaged alcohol sales at this location, and the increased number of alcohol coolers and display will not materially impact overall operations, and the store closes at 11 p.m. The use as proposed to be operated by the applicant will minimize or eliminate negative secondary effects on the neighborhood because an adequate operations plan and training is already in place and will continue, and the operation is expected to be in compliance with the crime prevention through environmental design SEPTED ordinance. Be it further resolved that the following conditions of approval shall apply to this project. Standard conditions set A, approvals. 1, that the applicant and plans submitted by the applicant and signed, dated, and stamped by the planning director shall constitute the approved plans, except if plan elements do not meet ordinance requirements and or as amended in this resolution. 2, that the use shall operate according to the application and per testimony as recorded in the Planning Commission minutes. 3, that this approval does not include any proposed signs or any future signs, and any future signs shall be subject to the requirements of Article 15 of the ordinance and permits received prior to installation. 4, that a land use development services, LUDS permit, building permit, and all other required permits to be obtained with the City of Grand Rapids prior to construction, demolition, or operation. 5, that any expansion of the approved special land use requires an additional special land use review and approval by the Planning Commission. 6, that the proposed use will comply with all other applicable city ordinances and policies and all state laws. 7, that this approval shall take effect 16 calendar days after the date of the Planning Commission's decision. 2, that the area of alcohol sales be consistent with the submitted floor plan, being 3 warm display shelves and 5 cooler shelves. 3, that the amount of transparency on the north and east side building elevations be approved as proposed. 4, that the parapet may exceed the building height by no more than 4 feet. 5, that the proposed use, floor plan, and overall operation and development comply with the requirements of the crime prevention through environmental design SEPTED ordinance.
Support.
All right, we have a motion and support. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you all. All right, our next case is 740 and 742 Clancy Avenue Northeast. Laura, go ahead.
So this case is a request for a two-family dwelling in the TNLDR Traditional Neighborhood Low Density Residential Zone District. Because Clancy Street is classified as a neighborhood residential street rather than a link residential or network residential street, and it's an interior lot as opposed to a corner lot, special land use approval is required. The applicant is also requesting a reduction in the required parking. One of the 3 spaces will be the reduction that's requested. The subject site is located on the east side of Clancy Avenue between Bradford and Fairbanks Street. There is a public alley that runs on the east side of the property. Surrounding properties are all also in the TN LDR neighborhood zone district. The property is within the boundaries of the Belknap Area Specific Plan, identified as Belknap TR, Traditional Family Housing. The plan indicates that this type of housing, the plan recommends new infill construction of residentially scaled, single-family duplex and triplex building types that are compatible with the surrounding buildings. The site is comprised of 2 narrow parcels, which are intended to be combined. Both parcels are currently unimproved. Incidentally, the original plat, these 2 parcels were originally platted as one single parcel, and I think in the 1920s, 2 single-family homes were constructed on that property, and then the parcels were subsequently split. And the homes have been, they're not there now, so they've been gone for some time. So the proposed use is not too far off from what used to be there. As you can see, the property is largely flat. There's not much elevation change. The top picture is a view from the street, and the bottom photo is a view from the alley. As combined, the property will have a total lot area of approximately 5,500 square feet and a width of 46 feet. Both of these meet the minimum requirements for a 2-family dwelling in this zone district. As you may have noticed in the plans, there are 2 structures proposed. The main dwelling that includes the two separate units, the duplex, and an accessory structure. And in the plans, you may have noticed the accessory structure also includes a proposed accessory dwelling unit, or an ADU, 1-bedroom unit on the 2nd floor. Because ADUs are allowed by right in this zone district, the ADU is not, the use is not included for your consideration today. The use is allowed by right with a 2-family or a single-family home. So the accessory structure, or the garage, is included with consideration as part of the overall site plan review. So if you have questions about that, please let me know. So as I said, the 2 structures are proposed. The duplex unit will have 4 bedrooms in each unit, split between the basement and the 2nd floors. You will see on the plan that there are 4 egress window wells to provide emergency egress from each of the basement bedrooms. The bedrooms all have private bathrooms included, and each unit on the main floor will have a kitchen, a living room, and a powder room. Also proposed is, you'll see along the south property line is a 3-foot wide walkway that will provide access to the back of the property and ultimately the ADU. As proposed, the structures will meet the side setback, the green space, height, transparency, and the entrance orientation requirements of the zoning ordinance. I have a table in the staff report that shows the requirements side by side with what's proposed. The front setback the requirement is an RBL that's established by the median setback of properties on the same block. The setback was not indicated on the plan, and the RBL calculations were not provided. I did a rough calculation of what's seen here on the site plan. It looks to be in line with what is existing in the neighborhood. So the Planning Commission may wish to consider if enough information has been provided for your decision today. And, maybe a condition of approval that the setback will meet the ordinance requirements at permitting. The detached garage, an accessory structure may be placed within 3 feet of the side and the rear property lines. The setback of this accessory structure meets that requirement. It's set back more than 10 feet from the alley. Staff finds that a 10-foot setback for a garage at an alley provides for a safe and adequate turning radius in and out of the garage. Regarding parking, 2 parking spaces are proposed, 3 are required. There is parking available on Clancy Street on the west side, and there is the Rapid Route 11 runs on Lafayette with bus stops at the corner of Lafayette and Bradford, within 1/10 of a mile of the subject property. So the Planning Commission should consider if the parking reduction that's requested is adequate based on the availability of parking and transit in the area. We have received letters of support from neighboring property owners and the neighbors of Belknap Lookout. Details are in your packet about those. If you have any questions, please let me know. In sum, we are asking the Planning Commission to consider the impact of a 2-family dwelling on the desired character of the neighborhood, whether the site plan provides efficient livable space of the property, the architectural compatibility of the proposed structures in the neighborhood, and the adequacy of parking that's proposed. Are there any questions for me?
Any questions for Laura?
Can you tell us the access to the I know we don't have say over it, but how does one access the accessory building or residence?
So the access to that would be provided. It will be directly connected to Clancy, or like the public way, the sidewalk at Clancy Avenue, sidewalk that runs along the south property line, and then it's upstairs. So there's a separate entrance door on the south side of the garage.
Okay.
So this
Okay.
separate entrance would connect it to the stairway to the upstairs.
Okay.
Anyone else? Okay, thanks, Laura. I'll invite the applicant up to add any additional details.
David Maxim with Maxim Architecture, and Patrick Spitzley from Spitzley. As far as the setback, we did email over a survey where we had our surveyor go out and measure to each house and calculated the RBL. Maybe it got eaten in the email system again, where city email doesn't like Apple Mail. But I did take that new survey and import it into our CAD system. As we drew it here for the preliminaries, we're within 2 inches of the RBL, and we certainly can adjust that to meet exactly the requirements as we go through the LUDS permit. Just to speak to that, there's a lot here to go through, but just to reiterate, all we're really asking for here today is permission to build a duplex on these 2 lots instead of a single family. And we've done a number of these types of missing middle infill housing projects in the city recently, and we'll handle all of these details of, the RBL and whatnot as we go through that process, assuming that we're allowed to, build a duplex here at all. But I think the case is pretty straightforward. I was happy to see that the neighborhood area specific plan does call for duplexes, triplexes, and a variety of housing types for this very area. It just seems to be a technicality that the the designation of the street doesn't match what the area-specific plan and zoning would otherwise allow. So if there's any specific questions, we'd be happy to field them. Do you have anything to add?
Did you do any neighborhood engagement as part of this project?
Yes, we did. We met with Christina at Belknap Lookout Neighbors at Noble, and then attended their next board meeting and spoke to all and had a meeting with their entire board and fielded some questions. And I believe they took a vote there to support or not, and were in support, and only had one dissenting voter who just did not like the fact that since this is likely to be rental for the near future, they would rather see home ownership, of course. But other than that, they all seem to have strong support.
Does anyone have additional questions?
I'm curious how, this is not germane to our conversation really, but with the conversations that we've had as a commission related to the ADU, which we're excited about, it has to have its own sewer and water connection. I'm curious where that comes from in this case.
I assume it will come off Clancy. We're still in the preliminary phases. We haven't gotten there yet.
All right, interesting.
In your community outreach, when you're talking with Noble, are they aware that of the internal design of the duplex, that it's not likely to be two families, it's likely to be up to 9 individual residences on that property?
Yes, we provided them with the floor plans just like we did to you, and that was brought up at the meeting and discussed that, hey, this looks like it's, designed for renters. Yes, it really is designed for renters. It's sort of optimal for roommate situations or, situations where they're, increasingly we're seeing, just due to the rising cost of housing, which I'm sure everybody here is highly aware of, there's more and more people sharing spaces. And so this accommodates that pretty effectively. And we're proud of these sorts of designs where we give everybody their own bathroom, give them a decent bedroom, and make for space where you can share a housing situation without it being, just the traditional, wife, husband, and 2 kids.
Others?
To your point about the roommate situation, you had mentioned, I see there's a waiver requested for 1 of the 3 required parking spaces. I like this. If I was an eligible bachelor, then this would be great, but everybody would have a car. So I guess my question is, what do we do about that? What do we do? How can we not grant a waiver for parking?
The times that I've driven up and down Clancy, there seems to be plenty of street parking there. And I think the statistic is that 20% of renters in Grand Rapids don't have cars. So that seems entirely possible that someone might be renting here because it's so close to, say, the hospital and other amenities in the neighborhood, and would, be walking. That doesn't seem far-fetched to me at all.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. We'll open up the public hearing. If anyone's here to speak on this case, come up to the mic. Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing and turn to you all.
So I'm in support of this completely. I think it's an appropriate use for the site. Obviously, the neighborhood's in support of it. So I appreciate the design and the efforts to increase density on these infill lots. I think it's important for our city. Not concerned about parking in general, and based on the neighborhood support and the board support, I don't think they are either. So the only thing that I would say, having run into it in the past, and maybe it should have been a question, but is that in the event that the established setback doesn't align it with the neighboring properties, I would be in full support of an administrative departure to align the facade of this with the neighboring properties on the same side of the street. because I've had a number of instances in projects like this where the houses across the street are an extra 5 foot further back, and then it skews the numbers, and then I think looking at the neighboring properties, there seems to be a pretty well-established street wall on this side of the street, and so I would suggest that the face of this building be in line with those. And if it works out with the way established setbacks are calculated, great. If not, I would suggest getting an administrative departure or whatever is necessary to align it appropriately.
So when I first read through this, I was struck by the parking issue. But after reading, because it's essentially going to be 9 vehicles sitting there, but apparently the neighbors and the neighborhood association feel that there's, adequate space for that. So if they don't have a problem with it, I guess I don't either. One other comment, though, as I look at the very pretty rendering that was done, it seems to be this beautiful building on a wide open green plain. I think it would be nice to have a little more realistic rendition to evaluate with the existing buildings in there, so we knew how tight that was actually going to be and how important the setback was actually going to be. So I'm maybe not seeing the true rendering, with the buildings on the sides of how that would be. And I don't know how that would make me feel since there's so much support for it in the community. But I think that's a miss to not put a realistic rendering up there in your presentation. It's misleading, but I don't think at this point it changes my overall support for the project.
I'm supportive of this project. I think it's a good use of the infill. I agree it would be helpful to see it in with what are the neighboring properties, how close that is. I am glad that the garage, which enters off the alley, I think that keeps it, more street spaces open in that area. And glad to see that there's another unit going to be built above that to help us with the need for housing, as we've all experienced over the last few years. I also believe this is close enough to a lot of things on Michigan, the hospital, the research school, students, Grand Valley's, I think, nursing school is there, that you would probably have people that walk back and forth to work. It'd be easier than finding parking a couple blocks away. So I do approve this, and think it's a good way to use. It's interesting. I'm glad that you brought up that it was 2 separate lots at one time, because these are, pretty big as it is, and so it's hard to believe that they did that, but we've seen skinny houses before, so I think this is appropriate. It looks like it'll fit in the neighborhood.
Yeah, I'm very supportive of this project. I think it's this falls in line with some of the goals that we hope to achieve during our zoning conversations. And yeah, I don't see any issue with the parking. I'm comfortable with that. Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Just a curious question. Do we keep track of the number of ADUs in the city since the adoption of the new plan?
Yes, at last check, it was 6 new applications since the April 2023 changes.
Okay, well, okay.
Which is significant relative to the number of applications we had received over the decade prior. So.
Initially, I was concerned about the parking situation with it previously being a single-family home and now becoming a duplex with the potential of 9 vehicles, 7 without designated parking spots. But I think with the location of the duplex, as was mentioned earlier by the other commissioners, in proximity to the universities and the hospital, it may attract renters who are moving there for that very purpose because they do not have vehicles. And so I think that may that issue has resolved itself. Otherwise, I'm in support of the application.
All right, I agree, and the Route 11 bus line is also a high-frequency bus line too, so that helps with the parking situation as well.
And I think we can also recall some of the discussions that informed the community master plan conversations about parking, which was to support the elimination of parking requirements, or at minimum, the reduction of parking requirements, that there was quite a bit of participation, feedback from the participation work that we had, that we're asking the city to focus more on the need for housing and less on the need for parking in association with the housing. So it does seem to align with the sentiment that we heard.
Awesome.
I'll just add, too, that I appreciate with this size of a lot that there's gathering places both on the front, on the back, in front of the garage, so that we have places, it isn't just surrounded by concrete everywhere, but there are gathering spaces for people at several different locations.
Yeah, I think the design integrates well with the rest of the neighborhood.
Yeah, I was just going to say that it's seems small, but I like porches, and the fact that this has a porch, I think, is a huge deal.
All right, would anyone like to make a motion?
I'll deliver the motion. Now therefore be it resolved that the Planning Commission approves the special land use and site plan review request of Spitzley Group LLC, Patrick Spitzley, to construct a new 2-family dwelling consisting of 2 4-bedroom units at 740 and 742 Clancy Avenue Northwest for the following reasons. The proposed use will be consistent with the purpose and intent of the master plan and zoning ordinance, including the zone district, because the development will contribute to the greater variety of housing types in a low-density residential zone district, as referenced in 2024 Community Housing Plan as listed. The provision of a reduced number of parking spaces to support compact growth patterns aligns with the 2024 master plan as listed. The new 2-family dwelling at this location will support the recommendations of the Belknap Neighborhood Area Specific Plan for residentially scaled single-family duplex and triplex types in the area designated as Belknap. The proposed use will meet the site plan review standards of section 5.12.08E because the site has been harmoniously and effectively organized in relation to the size and type of lot, character of the neighborhood, and adjoining structures. The site design incorporates adequate means of ingress and egress with walkways connecting each residence to the public sidewalk. The driveway located at the alley will provide safe and convenient vehicular access to the 2 on-site parking spaces provided. The proposed use will be compatible, harmonious, and appropriate with the character and uses of the neighborhood adjacent properties and the natural environment because the proposed structures are consistent in scale and orientation with what is desired in the TN neighborhoods classification. The proposed use will result in a density appropriate for the area. The proposed use will not have adverse effects on the neighborhood because the proposed garage parking spaces off the alley will meet the requirements of the zone district. The building setbacks meet the minimum zoning requirements and are consistent with the neighboring properties. The detached garage accessory structure placed behind the main dwelling is appropriately located on the site. The proposed uses will not be detrimental, hazardous, or disturbing to the existing or future uses or to the public welfare by reason of excessive traffic, noise, or visual clutter, because vehicular access to the property will be from the alley. And this will be a residential use in a residential zoned area. The proposed use will not adversely affect the walkability of the neighborhood, impair pedestrian circulation patterns, disrupt the continuity of the urban street wall, or otherwise hinder the creation of the pedestrian-oriented environment, because the proposed building will be set back consistent with properties on the same side of the block. The placement of the house entrance and rear yard parking reflects a pedestrian-oriented site. The proposed use will not be detrimental to the financial stability and economic welfare of the city, because the infill development and provision of additional housing units will support a complete and stable neighborhood. The proposed use will comply with all other applicable city ordinances and policies and all applicable state laws, because the addition of an ADU will be permitted by right, subject to the use requirements of the zoning ordinance. Be it further resolved that the following conditions of approval shall comply to this project as listed on the screen.
Support. Oh, words aren't done.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
That an application for a lot combination shall be submitted prior to issuance of a street permit, and that all site and building components shall meet the zoning ordinance's requirements, including but not limited to the front setback, transparency, and building materials.
Now I'll support.
Okay, I have a motion and support. Any discussion? Does that third condition cover making sure that it's in line on the block and not necessarily?
Yeah, that's fine. I would just note that in standard conditions, we can strike that a LUDS permit is needed. I don't believe that that's correct for two-family dwellings. We handle it just through a building permit, so we can just strike Land Use Development Services LUDS permit.
Still support?
Support.
Okay. All right. I have a motion and support. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. All right. Our last case is 2984 North Bradford Street Northeast. And Elizabeth will walk us through this.
The next item on the agenda is a request from Corewell Health for their new cardiovascular ambulatory surgery center at 2984 Bradford Street Northeast. This is a request for an amendment to a planned sign program. I'm not sure where my maps went. I don't have any maps here, but you should have them in your packet. So, let's see here. The property is located within a planned redevelopment district, and that PRD was established in the early 90s. I wasn't living in Grand Rapids at the time, but I understand that that was for Blodgett Hospital, and that was before the merger of Butterworth and Blodgett into Spectrum. And so there was going to be a hospital there. That PRD was intended to be a hospital, and that's why that line if you're looking at your staff reports in the packet, that's why the line is sort of curvy. I believe there was supposed to be a road there. And as we all know, a new hospital there didn't come to pass. However, Spectrum, now Corwell, still owns that property and has been constructing new buildings there over the years. So we've had a number of amendments to the planned redevelopment district in that area. At the time that the PRD was established, the East Beltline Overlay District was appended to the PRD. It was not specific to signage, however. It was probably more site layout sort of elements. Over the years, some of the new buildings have used the East Beltline overlay standards for signage. Some have used the NOS, Neighborhood Office Service, and others have had just a general plan sign program. So in the last couple of buildings that have gone to the Planning Commission for approval, I know that I have assigned the NOS zone district. And I do recall at the time this went to the Planning Commission in 2023, we assigned the NOS zone district because, one, it was appropriate, being Bradford, it's not a high volume road, and given it, the size and the scale of the building, that seemed appropriate. At that time, Spectrum or Corwell, I'm not sure who it was at that time, they really didn't have an idea of what they wanted to do for signage. So we assigned NOS. Well, now they're ready to get sign permits, and it turns out that several of the signs that they're proposing don't meet the NOS zone district. And I will go on and explain what doesn't meet the NOS zone district. But I also I'm going to pull in a little bit of discussion about the East Beltline overlay. So the Planning Commission can consider, well, maybe the East Beltline overlay would be more appropriate than the NOS. So the Planning Commission could assign one of the two. You could also sort of do a mix if you wanted to keep the NOS but allow this additional sign. I hope that makes sense. So 3 signs are being proposed for this building. A ground sign, and that ground sign is not really under consideration today because it meets the NOS standards, okay? The NOS allows 32 square feet in area and a maximum of 5 feet in height, and I believe, and that's what is being proposed there. I do want to point out, if this were assigned the East Beltline overlay, it could be a 6-foot sign and 60 square feet. And that is, the East Beltline has higher velocity traffic, right? I'm not sure what the speed limit is, but people drive 60. And so a larger signage is appropriate on the East Beltline. So that's one thing I would ask the Planning Commission to consider in considering whether the East Beltline overlay is appropriate. Now they're also proposing a wall signage near the door facing Bradford. That proposed wall sign is 57 square feet. Now, in the NOS zone district, there is a maximum of 32, and in the East Beltline overlay district, there's a maximum of 40. So what is being proposed here exceeds both, okay? The third sign is on the expressway side. And we have all driven on the expressway, and we see signs on the backs of the buildings. The NOS zone district does not have any accommodation for that. The East Beltline Overlay District does have an accommodation for that, and actually allows a sign of up to 100 square feet facing the expressway. The applicant is asking for a sign of 57 square feet facing the expressway. So it would exceed the NOS, but it would be within the limits of the East Beltline overlay. We have here a couple of elevations or images of what the signage is. So this is the south elevation, and that would be facing the expressway. And then this is the north elevation at the door. So, in sum, we are looking at the appropriateness of the signage being proposed relative to the NOS zone district, which was assigned, perhaps reassigning it to the East Beltline overlay, or keeping the underlying NOS but allowing some modifications. So we're asking the Planning Commission to consider whether those modifications are reasonable and appropriate. Do you have any questions for me?
Any questions for Elizabeth?
Elizabeth, just one question. I'm familiar with this area because I go to orthopedic surgeons on Leonard, and then you go Leffingwell. There's not any traffic to speak of here, but there are some other buildings facing Bradford, I think, before you get to the East Beltline. Which do you use for them, the NOS or the overlay, in terms of considering
Which
signs?
buildings are you referring to?
I'm not exactly sure, but I thought there were some doctor's offices or some other buildings
Heart Center, I think.
in that area. And
Yeah.
I just wondered the consistency of
Give me just a moment,
of
and I will,
utilizing what they use.
and I'll pull up that map.
Are you talking about like the
Read 2024.
Yeah, maybe that's it.
What's Leonard?
No, you have to turn into it. Well, I thought you got it set it off at Bradford, but.
While we're looking, do we want the applicant to come up? Does anybody have, I don't, unless Elizabeth, you're.
This isn't, this isn't a make it or break it kind of question. I just wondered if there were other buildings there and what the.
Are we
what
talking about
use.
here? So,
No, going to this side, to the right of the picture, I think there's some other buildings in there. I just
to the
wondered.
right, meaning further east toward the East Beltline?
Towards the Beltline.
So they would be, they're in the East Belt, they're clear, those are more on the
Clearly?
East Beltline.
Okay.
And so anything on the East Beltline is assigned the East Beltline
I see.
overlay. This one is a little bit tricky because clearly it isn't on the East Beltline, right? It's not visible from the East Beltline. The original ordinance for this development assigned the East Beltline overlay, for site layout and things. but nothing in the original plan was ever built. So it's been piecemealed over
Okay.
the years.
Okay.
It's really all this area that I'm pointing in here that's in that former hospital PRD that, where, that's Corwell, where we've assigned things as they go.
Okay.
I have one additional question for clarity. It says here in the packet, the East Beltline Overlay District allows for an additional sign with up to 24 square feet. Did you say 100 square feet?
So there's two things. So there's a 100 square foot sign allowed facing the East Beltline, and then you do get a secondary sign of 24 square feet.
Thank you.
One last thing I want to, I really do need to mention this. I don't know that Corwell really uses electronic message centers, but the NOS allows electronic message centers. The East Beltline overlay does not. And that has been an intentional policy decision. We have determined that we don't want electronic message centers on the East Beltline. We want it to have a different character than maybe 28th Street or Plainfield.
All right. Thanks, Elizabeth. I'll invite the applicant up to add any further details.
Steve Field with Valley City Sign and also on behalf of Corwell Health. We feel that we've designed the signs in conjunction with Corwell Health, scaled appropriately to the building. Also bearing in mind that many of their patients are elderly, and the branding that we have chosen, or the size of the branding that we have chosen, is consistent with other facilities throughout the city and throughout the state. We're not requesting anything that is overpowering on the building or on the ground sign either. But we do feel that it's appropriate for their patient base that they anticipate visiting this particular clinic and surgery center. That's really all I have to offer. Is there any questions I could answer?
Yes. So in the application, it says that one of the justifications for asking for signs that don't meet the ordinance is wayfinding and making sure that people are getting to the right facility because there is that one next door. But the signs that are under consideration today do not indicate that this is the Heart Center. It just is Corwell Health. So I'm trying to understand how that would, so I assume the ground sign would say something, but the ones that are out of compliance, unless this elevation is incorrect, just say Corwell Health.
Which is consistent with their other locations. It's just branding, brand recognition, that the patient has arrived to the correct facility.
But it's not wayfinding to the Heart Center, correct?
I'm sorry?
It's not a wayfinding indication to the Heart Center.
The wall signage is not. No, that is brand.
Thank you.
Trying to look at the height of the sign, and it appears that it's hard for me to tell. Is the height of the sign on the front or the north elevation 94 inches? Is that the calculation that's being used to determine the square footage? And then how high are the letters actually on that sign?
I believe the 94-inch indication is the area of the wall, the height of that area. The actual sign on that is the logo portion is 36 inches in height, and the letters are 17 and a half inches in height.
Okay, is that on here somewhere I'm just missing?
It's a separate page.
Oh, I see, I'm sorry, it is on.
We show
Okay.
detail and elevation of the sign itself.
Yeah, I apologize, I missed that on the top, thank you.
And then I just want to confirm that this site is not connected for vehicle traffic between the cardiovascular center directly west, correct?
The 2902.
Right.
No.
I drove past it
This will not be
today, so-
connected to
Yep,
that.
thank you.
That's my understanding.
Any other questions for the applicant?
Just, you keep saying heart center, but this is actually for the cardiovascular ambulatory surgery center that is to be built, not the existing West Michigan
Right.
Heart that's further
Yes.
up Bradford.
Yes. Okay, thank you. All right, there's no public hearing for this, so I'll turn to discussion.
So I think a lot of times when these sign things come before us, I feel like when I look at the application and the scale of the sign on the building, it feels reasonably appropriate to me. It doesn't feel like it's overly big or unnecessary. I mean, obviously the sign on the expressway side is purely branding, not wayfinding in any way, because no one's going to, try to get there from the expressway. At least I don't think so. So I mean, in general, it feels pretty comfortable to me what they're proposing here. Not it doesn't feel excessive. And I'm curious, maybe. I don't know if I think what I always struggle with is where do the numbers come from in the ordinance, and how do we decide, right? Because sometimes it feels like I'm going on gut, and that I don't always like that so much.
So I'm glad you raised that issue, because that was something that struck me as well. When you look at the scale of these buildings, the proposed building is about 19,000 square feet of building footprint, single story, and has a linear frontage of approximately 160 feet, which is far more in line with some of the scale of the buildings that are on the East Belt Line, especially I was just looking at the Priority Health buildings, for example, at Leonard in the East Belt Line. So they are significantly larger, which probably helps in part explain why the sign allowances are greater than what the NOS district is. When you look at where many of our neighborhood office service districts, and you think about what a neighborhood office service is, the building scale is far different. It's far smaller, of course, because they are typically a district that transitions from a residential to maybe a lower intensity commercial district, like a traditional business area. And so I think that that's where some of that science, planning science comes in, where we have that proportionality of what's appropriately scaled signs for the typical building that is within a district. These are not intended to be signs in any district that provide maximum visibility. You can see by your purpose and intent statements of the sign ordinance that it is intended to provide wayfinding and distinction, but not to clutter and also be appropriately scaled in size. So I think that that's where some of that discrepancy comes into play between what we're allowing in the NOS district, which we had previously deemed appropriately scaled signs, but then we've allowed for an authorized building of a size that's significantly greater. And I think that that's where we're seeing this need, or desire at least, to have larger buildings. And when you look at it, your response was, it doesn't feel overwhelming to the scale.
Yeah, and I think maybe that's part of it, is that the scale of the signs in the ordinance is related to the building size. And I think there are other things that play into signage, right, in that could be a large building, but if it's right up against the street, a really large sign is maybe inappropriate. Anyway, so I guess as relates to this, this feels appropriate to me and comfortable. I don't know if there's I don't know if I have an opinion on whether we should switch the district or not. I don't know if there's a precedent-setting reason to do that or anything, more technical reason to do that, but I generally feel comfortable with the scale of the signs proposed for a building like this.
Elizabeth, they could approve a larger sign without assigning the East Belt Line overlay district, correct?
Today.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I think, so that would be going outside the NOS, assigned plan sign program. So
I
we
see.
could keep that, and then, but allow these other two signs.
These two signs to exceed NOS limits.
Right.
So you wouldn't have to assign a different district necessarily.
So my question related to that is, if we were to assign the East Beltline Overlay District to this site, would they then be able to increase their signage to 100 square feet facing the expressway, even though that isn't what's proposed here, and add that second 24-foot sign on any side of the building?
Yes.
Yes.
And they could have a 60-square-foot
Ground sign.
So question about the campus that this is going to fall in. This is not the only building. So do we need to be concerned with any precedent that we're setting by allowing them to exceed both of these overlays with their sign? Because then every other building there can come to us and say, hey, you did it for them, we want the same, and then the signage is all big facing the highway and all big facing Bradford. Because they're not the only building on that campus.
They're the only owner of property on that campus.
So they'll all be Corewell Health buildings.
At this time.
Yes, I would, based on what we know, Corewell Health would retain ownership of the entire campus, the entire PRD, but then assigning the East Beltline overlay would allow for increased sign rights beyond what they would have today.
Would they have to come back for each new building?
Yes, because it would be under the planned sign program still, right?
Right, and I think part of the problem is that because any building that they build is an amendment to the original PRD,
Right.
everything keeps coming back to the planning commission, at which time we consider signage.
Okay.
As you've heard me say before, PRDs have great things about them, but there's also challenges with them. And of course, the great thing about them is that they provide a flexibility to the plan of what is known at that time. But as market conditions change or plans of large institutions change, that is one of the considerations that they have to wrestle with, is to get flexibility on the front end to facilitate plans that they have currently. But then if there's changes, there is a process that requires both planning commission and sometimes city commission approval. So there's consequences to those decisions. And of course, that oversight is deemed appropriate when you're providing that flexibility on the front end to support a development that exceeds what is otherwise allowed under the regular zoning ordinance.
Do other commissioners have thoughts about this?
Sort of. I really, based on the scale of the sign in relationship to the building, in general, I don't have any issues with it, right? I'm having a really hard time digesting what we're supposed to do. My gut feeling is that unless the applicant's asking for us to change the district, and because it's part of a PRD, and I may be misunderstanding something, would be to just approve it as is and not change the designation, because the PRD, I mean, my understanding of PRD is you're adjusting potentially lots of criteria as part of that PRD, and the fact that they're going to have to come back every time because it's a PRD anyways, it seems appropriate to look at the signs as they come before us. So my inclination is to approve it without changing the signage reference for the PRD. But I guess I'm having a hard time with that because I just don't understand. I don't understand what the right way to approach it is.
I agree with everything that has been said. I feel comfortable with the size, and I don't think it's far enough or close enough to the East Beltline where you, like you said, people are, I think it's 55 and 45 and some, the speed limit in different districts, as I travel down there and try to stay within the law. And, but on Bradford, you're not having that same kind of, oh yeah, where's, I'm looking for. So I think to keep the signs smaller and not put them in, if that's what we're considering, is not to overlay this with the East Belt line, but to consider them on their own as a PRD and how appropriate they are, and I feel that they are appropriate. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I don't think, as you said, it's close enough to the East Belt line to warrant changing the whole district. And based on the answer we got to my initial question about their ability then to add additional signage that's even bigger, I don't agree with that. I think the biggest issue I'm having, I understand confusion on medical campuses, like the OAM one down at Leffing. After my surgery, I went to 3 different entrances before I figured out where I was going. But this site currently, this building is currently the only building on this site, and I understand that there may be future developments, but right now, it isn't an issue of wayfinding, and so the justification for deviation from the district requirements being for wayfinding is frustrating to me and untruthful, frankly, in my opinion. But
Agreed.
Everybody else has their own opinion, and that's totally fine.
What is in the resolution, we've got reference 78 acres, but that's not what's outlined in blue on our screens now. Is there a bigger campus that I'm?
Yes. In your packet, oh shoot.
Resolution or staff report?
In the resolution number 2, just mentioned 78 acres. I don't know if that's accurate, but I'm just curious what else is happening here.
Meaning that, again, you don't need to choose what we have written there, but it was that whole PRD that was intended for the hospital. So it.
Gotcha. And it generally goes on our east of here to the church, is that correct? East of this parcel and over to the church? Okay, I gotcha. Okay, that makes sense.
It's not terribly helpful for all of you, but you can see the outline in red is the campus. We're focused on one particular parcel that's highlighted on your screen, but the entire campus is fronting along Bradford, this parcel, as well as across the street. I'll flip it the other way too. And then, of course, up Leffingwell. So you can see outlined in red, here's the subject property. Sorry, Carol, I know this is going to be hard to follow. Along Bradford, which will be like the southeast corner of the PRD, but the PRD traverses all the way up Leffingwell as well. So to Elizabeth's point, it was a larger, pardon? Oh, it was a larger campus at that time, so it's a significant size PRD, which is the acreage that I believe you're seeing.
Yeah.
Does anyone need to see that more closely, or are we comfortable?
I was just going to clarify for the record that 78 acres goes to the west of this property and then north up Leffingwell.
Yeah.
For Carol's benefit.
Thanks, Mike.
You're welcome.
You're right.
So I guess if folks are leaning toward approval, I would encourage us not to change the entire zone district. But again, I won't be making the motion.
I can make the
You mean
motion.
changing the assigned?
Assigned, yes.
Assigned
Thank you,
district.
Kristen.
Okay.
Yes, I'm sorry, yes.
But I want to make sure everyone's comfortable before I make the motion, and there's no more discussion. Good?
Fine.
Okay. All right, now therefore it be it resolved that the Planning Commission approves the request of Corewell Health, Peter Kane, for an amendment to the plan sign program of Corewell Health at 2984 Bradford Street Northeast for the following reasons. The applicant has demonstrated that the proposed plan sign program amendment would result in a more attractive aesthetic setting, improve safety, provide more convenient identification for planned users or other similar purposes, because it allows for the adequate and effective signs for identification and appropriate commercial speech. Excuse me. That the location and/or physical characteristics of the applicant's property or the needs for identification are unique when compared to other similarly situated parcels in the same zone district and in the same vicinity, because the overall development consists of approximately 78 acres and is comprised of multiple buildings. The applicant has demonstrated that the proposed plan substantially furthers the purposes and intent of Section 5.15.01, because the proposed amendment would protect the need to provide directional awareness for users of the development. The applicant has demonstrated that approval of the plan sign program amendment would not create any adverse impacts on one or more properties in the vicinity, because the proposed amendment reinforces and supports the character of the surrounding development by taking into account building scale and massing and nearby travel speeds, balances the need and right to communicate with needs to promote orderly communication, promote community aesthetics, and prevent a proliferation of signs and sign structures that can be confusing and distracting, and will ensure that signs are located, designed, constructed, installed, and maintained in a way that protects life, health, property, and the public welfare. Be it further resolved that the following conditions of approval shall apply to this project. Standard condition set A approvals, Elizabeth will put on the screen here. Striking 3, 5, and 7. And that number 2, that the approval shall have immediate effect.
Support.
I have a motion and support. Swem was the support. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Aye. Motion carries. Thank you. Okay, that brings us to Planning Commission discussion. Anything for that?
Nope.
Nope. Okay, then I will open up for public comment. If you're here from the public and would like to speak, please join us at the microphone. Seeing none, I will close public comment. And we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.